Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special interview with Scott Peterson as part of the Consulting with Authority podcast. My name is Scott Cantrell. And Scott, before we get into some of the details here, I just want to thank you for being here and carving out some time for us today.
Scott, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today with you and get to spend some time with your audience. I appreciate the invitation.
Well, I know you're going to have a lot of fantastic value to give everybody. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to everyone. Everybody, Scott Peterson is the founder and managing partner of Carver Peterson Consulting. Founded in 2014, they help growth-minded entrepreneurs build high-performing sales teams to win, retain, and grow more of their right clients. Through their in-depth and collaborative engagements, they build sales playbooks that are repeatable, scalable, and sustainable. And over the last 6 years or so, they have expedited and safeguarded the growth of over 80 growing businesses across the country. Scott, that's quite a resume just in the last few years. And we're going to get into what Carver Peterson does a little bit later on and kind of how you do it. But before we do that, one of the most, I think, meaningful and valuable parts of these interviews, certainly for me and from what I hear from our listeners and viewers, is learning about where people came from, because understanding the origin story of a superhero, right? I'm not necessarily comparing you to Superman, so no worries, but knowing the origin story of someone who's doing great things can really help provide a level of insight and understanding in terms of not only where they've been, but where they're going and how they got there. And so many lessons can be gleaned from other people's histories and backgrounds. So give us a little bit about your journey. How did you get where you are today from where you started? You know, you and I have had a couple of conversations in the past, and it really is a fascinating story that I know there's a lot of kind of gold to mine from your experiences. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that with our audience.
All right. Well, thanks again for the intro. I appreciate it. So yeah, the backstory, I grew up in a small town in Oregon, a college town, Oregon State. And, you know, my dad's an entrepreneur himself. He's a custom home builder and built, you know, beautiful homes for 40 years. And, you know, as a kid, I was digging holes for him. My sister was filing. You know, we were in the family business. You know, we had his clients at our dining table, you know, at nights and weekends, you know, putting the blueprints on the table to build their beautiful homes. And so entrepreneurship is definitely in my blood. And another piece that came along with that, you know, my dad was able to coach all my teams growing up. And so there was just a lot of love and passion for entrepreneurship and something that I was always really interested in. I ended up going to school at Oregon State, so stayed local. I pretended like I moved away. I didn't take the laundry home. But when I finished school, I moved to Boston. You know, I hadn't been east of Colorado. It was one of those things where I just wanted to see what life had to offer in a bigger market. And I started working for a company called Aerotech, a recruiting firm. And the Aerotech story is just an unbelievable one. You know, when you look at when you rewind the tape and really look at what happened, you know, the founders, the original founders of the company in the 80s in Baltimore, you know, started this thing out of their garage or basement, whatever the case. And you fast forward it to today and it's 7 billion. It's still amazing. Private. They just grew, you know, account by account, market by market. It's an international company now that's just done really, really well, you know, over these last, you know, 40 or so years. And so I started there in 2001. You know, I thought it was a starter job. And this is some of the advice that I give for a lot of younger, earlier professionals, right? Just getting into their career. I was lucky that I had the opportunity to work for just some amazing people. And to me, you know, especially earlier in your career, like leadership is the ultimate accelerator. You know, having the right people in front of you and guiding you and coaching you makes all the difference in the world. And I lucked out. I just had some phenomenal people, you know, who I was reporting to and working for, and their guidance was really impactful. So this starter job quickly turned into something much different. And I got to be a part of building a division that didn't exist in the Boston market. So it was, again, like very entrepreneurial, which fit my DNA. And what was crazy about it, that division was established and successful in other markets, but just not Boston. And so we had price floors that we could not exceed. So, you know, the way it translated out, we were the most expensive and we weren't the best, right? We were the most expensive. We were brand new, competing against well-established competitors. So as a 20-something-year-old, what a great way to learn, like pursuing your first prospect with no like strong offering behind you, but you couldn't overpromise because you weren't sure if you could totally deliver, but you couldn't burn bridges because you only had so many companies that fit the profile.
Yeah, that's
So it
a
was just
tricky thing.
it was a great way it was frustrating at the time, challenging and all those things. But in hindsight, what a great way to learn. And the only way that I really stuck that out was because of the people that, I was working for and with, and had the opportunity to eventually lead. So ultimately that division became a really successful one. Boston became really successful in itself. So many great people and leaders came out of that operation. And then I got the opportunity to lead one of the offices. The company moved me to San Diego in 2008, which was a really strange and challenging time in itself. The economy was heading down, and I got there in a tough situation. The top performers were in a lot of ways some of the more misaligned to the values of the organization and whatnot. And so it was just one of those things where it was, a turnaround job. And we went from, office number 160 out of 250 all the way up to 33.
Wow.
And it was so much about, getting the right people in the right seats and the right people on the bus and all those sayings, right, that come along with it. I was such a young leader. I didn't know what I didn't know. So we just really did the fundamentals, and as a result, grew a lot. And we built a really cool team and culture, and got a lot of recognition that came along with it. And as a result, the organization asked me to move to Illinois in 2011. Illinois was a big shop. It was the number 4 office in the company. We had a huge team, and it was a winning team that just had to evolve into a different style of winning team. It was one way that had worked for a long time, and just some things that had to change in order for them to get to that next level. And so it was a great opportunity to evolve a team and continue growing. And then, a year and a half later, I got a chance to go into a downtown market, and we ended up rolling 5 offices up into one, and almost like a merger situation, and attack a downtown market that was really unusual for the company. And so there were just these experiences that came, over these 13 years at Aerotech, where I got to build one, I got to turn one around, I got to evolve one, and then I ultimately got to lead this, this merger. And all of it came back to the same things. It was having a clear vision, with a clear mission and clear organizational goals and strategies, and getting that team moving in the same direction. And that was in so many ways the work. And we did really, really good work over those years. And it's something that I'm really proud of. And quite frankly, was the foundation for everything that I'm doing now with Carver Peterson that I started in 2014. So I'll shut up there because I've been going on for a minute, but that's the origin story prior to starting Carver Peterson.
No, it is a fascinating story. And I think a lot of folks don't have clarity like you talked about, right? You talked about the key thing in all 3 of those very different situations was understanding, I guess, first where you were, and then just as importantly, having a clear vision for where you wanted to go. And maybe you tell me, but between the experience in Boston, where you're basically creating something new, and then San Diego, the turnaround, and then Chicago, the evolution, and then sort of the optimization piece of it all, was your experience, and I'm going to tie this back to somewhere else we're going later, but was your experience in Boston in some ways, not because maybe it was fresh for you and you were newbie and the most green when you were starting out, but just from the standpoint of the company was younger, it was still filling its own way out. Was that the hardest time or the easiest time from a clarity standpoint? Right? Because I can see it. I could imagine it being either way. And clarity is something that I've personally been trying to achieve, maybe is the most honest and indicting way to say it with my firm. So just tell me about your experience related to that Boston point. Was there clarity in terms of what you were trying to achieve there at the beginning?
Yes. And here's why it's such a good question. Okay. So now that I'm out of that organization, right? My love and respect and admiration was always there, but it's at a different level now. Being able to really appreciate what they've been able to accomplish. And the foundation is this wildly disciplined organization that has a extremely refined and tight sales strategy in every single discipline. So the discipline that I was responsible for was established elsewhere It just wasn't established in Boston.
Okay.
And so I knew who we were going after. I knew what we were selling. I knew the value proposition of it. I'll tell you that as a young seller, I was a bit scared to go after my best prospects because I felt like I wasn't quite there yet. Like I didn't want to mess them up because I knew there were only a few. And so as a result, I ended up selling to more misaligned prospects that ultimately were a mismatch for our service offering that only impacted my confidence negatively because it wasn't a match.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things. It was like I was trying to protect myself by, selling to the B's or C's when really the A's were the ones where the whole thing really fit.
Yeah.
And so it was a painful lesson to learn, but the lesson was, your product market fit is your product market fit. And the more clear and specific you can be with that product market fit, the more there's alignment and the more there's going to be a lot of natural gravitation toward one another.
Yeah.
But you need to understand what that is. It was more simple in a lot of ways in Boston than it may have appeared.
Okay. Gotcha. No, I think it's a great lesson. And, my firm is the new venture I'm working on is relatively young, and coming from a business where we did have a very mature and clear understanding of who our target market was, what our value proposition was, what the product and market fit was, to, now having a level of clarity, but not a super refined level of clarity. I totally feel what you're describing. And I suspect a lot of the folks listening to this have the same type of experience. And so this actually ties directly into kind of where I wanted to go next. I want to dive into the Carver Peterson story. And so telling us about how you transitioned from Aerotech and founded Carver Peterson, and tying into that, how you got started on the business development piece, because I know and this is probably not news to you, being in the space that you're in, working with teams on their sales structure and optimizing the overall sales process and experience. But one of the most common challenges that I hear from consultants that I work with, consultants who are clients, or consultants that I just collaborate with, is, we want to continue to refine our business development strategy. We want to be in front of more of the right types of people. We want to have better, more compelling conversations, right? So this business development challenge, or our opportunity, is what it really has always been, I would argue probably will always be, this riddle that we have to try to solve. And so talk a little bit about your transition from Aerotech to Carver Peterson, and how you started to get initial momentum with Carver Peterson, what those early days were like from a business development point of view.
It's a great question. So let's see here. When I first started, I left Aerotech with a strict non-compete, and Aerotech was selling to the Fortune 5,000s of, Fortune 500, Fortune 1,000, Fortune 5,000, like the bigger organizations, right? And that wasn't going to be my audience. But I also didn't have a network. I wasn't from Chicago. And, so there was really no personal or professional network there. Everything was starting brand new. And so, really the way that the whole thing started, I was afraid to put my flag down of like, where I really belong. And there was still things I needed to learn, but I had an idea of where I could be have the biggest impact. But it's scary to pick that lane, because you're going to cut off options. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that a lot of consultants and salespeople have, quite frankly, is that they're not specific enough. And so, what I learned quickly though was, by opening myself up to the world and communicating to my network what I was looking to accomplish and who I was looking to accomplish for, even though it was a little bit more broad than it should have been, it started getting me into the lane. Mm-hmm. And the more I started having these conversations, and the more I could get refined, the better introductions that were starting to come out of my network and my community. And ultimately, when I found where I belonged, and ultimately where I found that I belonged was in this community between 2 million and 50 million in revenue, growth-minded entrepreneurs that were trying to build and grow and scale, and sales was an important piece of it. I started finding these little pockets, and one of them was a startup community, an accelerator community in Chicago called 1871. I immediately chose to volunteer. right? So they were looking for mentors. They were looking for people with guidance. And while that community that I was mentoring wasn't exactly the fit to my ideal client profile, the other mentors were. The
Cool.
other mentors became this community that I started like building rapport and connection. And through those relationships, the right doors started opening. And so it was interesting. It was all through giving, so it was giving my time first. Anytime I would make a relationship with someone, it was about opening my network and expertise to them in ways that I could give before expecting to receive.
Right.
And then anytime an introduction came back my way, being able to close that loop back to the person who made the introduction and provide feedback around what worked and what didn't work and what was aligned and misaligned, and giving thanks and showing that you were caring for those introductions that they had made for you was really, really impactful in terms of earning your way up to better introductions, right? Like no one wants to make the A+ introduction out the gate to someone they don't know,
right?
But they will as you continue to earn credibility and trust and show that you can follow through and do good work. So all of that was kind of the origin. And then getting that first customer, that was really like dead square on what we call the blue chip profile is where everything started, right? Like getting really locked in there, doing your best work, getting your testimonial, getting your case study, and starting to leverage for other introductions just becomes such an important momentum builder in your ideal client profile.
That's really cool. And I want to dive into, while we're here, describe for, you and I've had a conversation about it, but describe for the audience how you sort of put together your blue chip profile, because I think this is a really fascinating idea, and you guys are incredibly specific. I mean, we're talking about totally honed in on who you specifically want to do business with, and maybe as important, or not more important, but as important, is who you do not, who is not an ideal client and who you would not do your best work for. So describe for the audience the idea of this blue chip profile and kind of how you all went about putting it together, because I think I need to hear it. And I suspect that a lot of my listeners could benefit from hearing it as well.
Yeah. Well, so there's a really simple 2x2 grid that kind of starts the whole explanation, and the vertical axis is, do they align? Does this prospect align financially, right? Is this going to be a viable fit from a financial aspect?
Sure.
And then on the horizontal line is the cultural alignment. Okay. So is this someone that, you're going to work well together, right? This is going to be someone that you want to build and grow with over time, someone that you can grow with, someone that can refer you to others, someone that can build your brand. So there's a lot of things to unpack around cultural alignment, but those are the X and Y. And, that top right box is what we call the blue chip, so it's someone that's aligned culturally and financially. And then, the other end of that spectrum is misaligned financially and misaligned culturally. And it's crazy how often we see our clients with clients fitting in that box. We call that box the graveyard. If you have too many clients sitting in the graveyard, it can kill your business. And so understanding what those profiles look like, because they tend to be different, becomes a really important piece. So if you can start to evaluate, your book of business by breaking them down into this little 2x2 grid, it's really impactful. Inside of each box is the demographics, the psychographics, and the trigger events. Okay. And so, the demographics are all the things like, how big are they? Where are they? Right. Is there a particular industry? How old are they as organizations? Are they, what's their ownership type? Is it public, private, nonprofit, right? So like as many characteristics that we could identify would give you a lot of clarity around like who you best fit with. Is it a big company? Is it a small company? Is it a local company? Is it an international company? Like all those things matter, right? And it gives us a good starting point to really narrow down the pool. The psychographics are like what they really care about, like what do they think and feel and want and need? Like, and for us, like we know that we need business owners that are really growth minded, growth oriented, and wanting to build and scale, right? Like that's something that's really, really important to us. We also need leaders who are going to be really open minded and vulnerable and willing to change. right? Like there has to be a learner mindset. They have to be willing to get in front of their team. And we also have to have people that are going to be willing to roll their sleeves up and do the work, right?
Yep.
So those are some like really key ingredients, key characteristics of the leaders that we're looking for that go beyond just the demographics. The triggers, so like what happens for them to have the need right now? Did a leader change? Did they win a new contract? Was there a huge event like, our global pandemic that we just went through that caused the business to shift?
Right.
Like what's the trigger? And is there a common trigger that brings people to you or opens the door for you? And so for us, it's the, founder rainmaker is at capacity, and they just can't continue to grow and scale because they're running out of time and they have other responsibilities, or the sales leader turns over, or they have an underperforming team, but they have an outlier performer and they're trying to get more people to perform like that person. Like those are some of the things that we can speak to. And when you put all those together in your conversation, the profile gets clearer and clearer and clearer. And so, it's common that an introduction will come out because the profile is just so specific.
Gotcha. That's phenomenal. Thank you for breaking that down. I love the 2x2 matrix breakdown. And then within each of the boxes, what are the demographics, psychographics, and trigger events, which is one that I don't think I've given personally enough attention to myself. You started with no network, with a healthy non-compete. You volunteered to do mentorship through 1871. Through that group, you met other mentors that were in alignment with who you wanted to work with, who you could serve. Describe for me, if you would, how that COI network started to be created and evolved. Or maybe a better way to ask or to get where I want to go is, what was your COI process? So when you identified someone who could be a center of influence for you and introduce you to other folks, what did that relationship look like? How did you manage that relationship? Or even today with the center of influence, how do you manage those types of relationships? Because I think this is a massively overlooked business development strategy, and working with my clients on the front end of what you guys do on the back end, marketing versus selling. I think there's consultants working way, way too hard, spending way, way too much time, effort, and money on marketing shiny objects, as opposed to getting to the core of the opportunity, which I think COIs are a really important and highly, highly valuable marketing and business development channel. So if you wouldn't mind, talk about your experience in managing those types of relationships.
Yeah, this might be the most important business development strategies and the one that's led to the majority of our business.
Wow, okay.
So getting a client to refer you to a prospect is the gold standard.
Sure.
Right. That's the best. And that takes work, and I'm thankful that we're at that point now. But to really get started, it took those strategic partnerships to get there. And when I think of strategic partnerships, I go back to my blue chip profile and I say, who are the other people who have a trusted relationship with the key stakeholder inside of my blue chip client? Yep. So that's where everything starts. So my blue chip profile, are they working with another consultant on marketing? Are they working with someone on talent? Are they working with someone on HR? Are they doing outsource financial? And that actually is one of our key characteristics too, is that they outsource other non-core aspects of their business, right? So knowing who those people are that are also supporting my blue chip clients became a really natural relationship, right? If we can do our best work and help that business owner and business overall grow and scale, it's going to allow these other service providers more work and greater success as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of us are really trying to support with the same end goal. And so it only makes sense that you'd have these relationships, but you have to be able to identify them. And you also have to be able to offer a mutually beneficial relationship. If it's just a take, it's not going to work.
Right. Yeah.
And so over time, what I ended up finding was that a lot of our clients were either a member of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, or Vistage. And now there's, several others as well, but those were the two primary. And so building a relationship with Vistage chairs became an important early relationship for me, and being able to support their CEOs that they were leading was an important way to give. And then also be able to refer people that were considering Vistage or thinking about Vistage. And then, really the same inside of EO. EO, follows the scaling up and traction philosophy. And there's a lot of EOS implementers that are tied to that community. And the EOS implementers have become our very best strategic partners. Like, they're laying down such a wonderful foundation, and we're able to build and grow on it in such an impactful way that once realizing that relationship was mutually beneficial and not competitive, and it was like, okay, there's a lot that we can do here. But it also, again, took me saying, hey, here's a prospect that we could work with right now, but it probably makes sense to refer them over to an EOS implementer to lay down that foundation first.
Interesting.
And once we started doing that, instead of just trying to take every prospect or opportunity that we could, is where those relationships really started accelerating. There's an intentionality with alignment, and there's an intentionality around, just making sure that you're giving and not just trying to take. And those are the most important pieces.
That's great. And, you're talking about EOS implementers. I can imagine early on the initial, sort of gut check would have been, oh, well, EOS implementers may be competitive in our space. But you quickly realized you didn't just accept that, inherent thinking track, right? You investigated it and realized, no, they're incredibly collaborative in terms of what we're doing and what they're doing. And you turned that potential, problem or challenge into a huge benefit, and now a healthy COI network. Your point about being willing to defer and delay your own business and give it to a COI first, because that's in the best interest, you believe that's in the best interest of the future client, to then have not a mandate, not a formalized, statement to the EOS implementer that, okay, we're going to refer you this business. And we expect, right? There's none of that, none of that type of stuff going on. It's just, you need to, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, you need to work with this EOS implementer, do these things first, and then we'll come back and we can have a conversation. You're setting up the EOS implementer to, I don't know how you're getting in touch with the client in the first place, but regardless, that client's now going to be reintroduced to you later. And at that point, your authority will be maxed out. You will have established so much trust, so much credibility, and so much authority because you're willing to say, not yet. And that's huge. And I know from personal experience, I'm not in that place right now, fortunately, but I know from personal experience how difficult it can be for a consulting firm to delay or defer business without some guarantee that it's coming back.
Sure.
But this is what you're speaking to about being thoughtful, intentional about it. And yes, being giving, but not just to your COI partners, which in this case, EOS implementers, but also giving to the organization that you want to serve later, i.e., yes, we can help you, but it would be much, much more beneficial if you did these things first. Let me make the introduction. And then when you're ready or when it makes sense, we'll re-engage with the conversation.
Right.
Talk about establishing an advocate in someone before they're even a client. Was that something that you just felt was the right thing to do? Was it a business decision or all the above? Tell us a little bit about your thinking about that, and the mindset kind of had to, you had to put aside, we could engage with this client now. They'll probably write us a check and we can deposit that money. But you said, no, that's not in their best interest, ultimately not in our best interest. Describe how you feel about that, your thinking behind that, because I think if more consultants could internalize that, the world would be a better place, but they would probably be busier consultants.
It's evolved. It has always been what's best for the client. That's always been the center point of, okay, we're stepping into an engagement and we're saying, okay, how do we increase revenue and maximize profitability?
Yeah.
How do we win more of the right clients, retain the right clients, grow the clients? That's our whole thing, but they have to be strong. And if they don't have their foundation, if they don't have the right pieces in place, it's going to be really hard for them to be able to go and it's going to be hard for us to deliver on our promises.
Right.
And
sure.
so what's happened is, over the course of these last 6 years, we've had some engagements just go really, really well. And we've had others that have been tougher sledding. And what was interesting, we ended up, it was really by accident that we had an engagement that was working with an EOS implementer. And I was wondering, like, how's this going to work? Is there, too many chefs in the kitchen? And the engagement moved differently. The work that we put in place was being integrated differently, moving differently, accelerating differently. And I was like, holy cow, man, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And so that was, in a lot of ways, the origin of it was like, hey, their foundational work is so impactful. And I shouldn't say just EOS implementers. There's scaling up coaches, there's Pinnacle business guides, there's others, right, that are doing all this phenomenal work. And so that foundation, it just is so critical. And then in other cases where that wasn't there, and seeing the challenges that came from it, it wasn't allowing us to do our best work. If we can't deliver on our brand promises, I'd rather not do the work. Right? If we can't drive revenue and maximize profitability, then it's not in any of our best interest to do the work. It's hard, it's frustrating, it's challenging, and it doesn't build the organization. And so it just makes sense to do what's best for the client. The other thing that I want to mention here is that, by having the relationship with the key stakeholders, right? You get your founders and your executive leaders. When you can attach yourself to like the business and really trying to understand their desired future state, like getting a holistic view of the business and not just like the one thing that you do. But if you can really get an understanding of the holistic business and then start to identify where there's some gaps or challenges, that now there's an opportunity to impact the client outside of your area of expertise through your network.
Yeah.
Right. And so early there, it was like, okay, well, who do I know that's really good at this thing? And then it became a responsibility over time to say, if I'm going to serve my clients and want to do what's best for my clients, it's really, really important to me that I find the best service providers in all of these disciplines that are complementary to ours that our clients may need.
Yep.
And so it was that intentionality that started to say, okay, let's build out this strategic partner network. So I know who to introduce when I see these things happen. And there's a lot of appreciation that comes from the business, the business owner and business, because we're solving other problems.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then there becomes this, this world, this community that you start living in and can really do good work together. And that just kind of raises everything up of like, okay, we can do great work. Where else can we do this together?
Yeah. I love this. I love this approach and this general model. And I think a lot of consultants, especially solopreneurs, but even smaller consultant shops as well, where they're not, they have their zone of genius and that's where they want to stay. Right. And so it absolutely doesn't make sense to try to be jack of all trades, but just because you're not jack of all trades doesn't mean you can't introduce your clients to other masters. Right. And so I think that's a huge opportunity. I call that, sort of positioning yourself as the gatekeeper of resources with your clients. And you get to be the one that walks the sales expert in the door, or the marketing guru in the door, or the financial person, or the HR person, or whoever it is. And it allows you to elevate your position and the level of value that you bring to a client beyond your own zone of genius, while still doing the best work you can in the area where you want to focus. I think that model is great. The other note that I want to mention that I think is really, really important, and you stated it and alluded to it, I want to make sure I re-articulate it here, is you're talking about introducing these other partners even ahead of your own work, right? And the idea there, yes, it is in the best interest of the organization, 100%, and that's the right reason to do it, of course. At the same time, though, you realized that organization, while a prospect for your firm, was not an ideal prospect for your firm, right? It wasn't a blue chip organization when they came to you. And so the question then is, how can we help this organization become a blue chip prospect for us? How can we help them become a blue chip client for us? And whether you did that intentionally or not, you did right by your client, and that's always going to lead to a good result ultimately. But the EOS implementer, the scaling up coach, the Pinnacle, the whoever the advisor consultants are, that are doing a lot of that foundational work, they're turning your prospects into ideal blue chip prospects. And I wrote that down, helping potential prospects become ideal prospects. That in and of itself is an incredible value for your own business, not to mention for the organization you serve. So it's something, a mindset or a way of thinking that I hadn't really considered before, even on our past conversations. Anyway.
That is so well said, and a really good find. I've never said it quite like that before. That really just locked it home. I mean, what you're explaining makes total sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're grooming a prospect into your blue chip prospect.
Yeah, exactly. And you're doing that by at the very least, right? We can't, determine how that relationship's going to go, but at the very least we can make the right introductions, right? And then it's up to that consultant or that advisor and the organization to do good work together, and hopefully they will. But you're putting the odds in your own favor of a random prospect becoming an ideal prospect. And most importantly, I don't want to understate this. Most importantly, you're making the best recommendation to the organization that you can. I want to dive into a little bit about your process at Carver Peterson and how you guys engage with a client. I know that a lot of different coaches, a lot of different consultants, a lot of different types of advisors have different types of processes that they utilize. Your all's process is especially, I think, unique. And I would love you just to kind of walk through it at a high level if you're willing here, because your process, you kind of have this meta thing going on, Scott, right? Where your process is in some ways the product. The process that you all are utilizing has been refined and provides a model or a track that you're then teaching your own clients in some ways. And obviously, I know there's probably a lot of variance and adaptations depending on who you're working with, but would you mind just sort of walking everybody through how you engage with a prospect initially and walk them through that client conversion process?
Yes. Yeah, I'd be happy to share. So as we had just explained, you now get a sense of how an introduction comes.
Right.
Either whether through a client or through a strategic partner, it's really important that we're getting introduced to the founder or CEO of the company. So that's where our introductions come. That initial introduction is really all just about, learning of one another and getting a feel for, are their pains and problems aligning to our solutions and services?
Yeah.
And do we align culturally? So we're trying to understand, are they checking the boxes for those things that we had talked about earlier,
right,
the psychographics, wanting to build and grow and scale and, vulnerable and transparent and open to learn and change and willing to roll their sleeves up, right? So all those things start happening out of that initial conversation. And once we feel a really good alignment, there's an invitation to do a whiteboard session together. And so you have to be selective there because there's a big investment of time that's going to come with this.
Right.
And so the whiteboard session ends up being 2 hours, and we invite that key stakeholder and their additional stakeholders that would be responsible for helping them build and grow and scale to do a virtual whiteboard session. And, in the days of pre-COVID, we'd walk into the office and actually jump on the whiteboard.
Sure.
But there's so many nice tools now that have allowed us to recreate it. But we're sitting down and we're talking about, the current state, desired future state of the business. We're trying to understand what matters most to them and how they're gauging the health of their business. And we're taking a deep dive into their sales strategy, their sales process, and their sales structure. And out of that 2 hours, the whole thing is focused on them, right? Mm-hmm. The whole thing is about them. There's not a pitch deck. It's just learning about them. And we are showcasing our expertise by the questions that we're asking.
Yep.
And the second level questions and the third level questions, right? So you're showcasing expertise through the questions. And then you're also getting a chance to model and experiment and feel what it would be like if we were to work together. Because that whiteboard, in a lot of ways, mimics and models, what some of our traditional engagements look like. So we end up taking all that 2 hours of information. And at the end of the whiteboard, our one promise is that we'll put together a report and we'll present it back to them with our recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
And we do just that, right? So we take the 2 hours of work together and invest time to put together a really thoughtful report with insights and recommendations. And about a week later is when we would present that back to them. And it's in essence, hey, if we were in your shoes, these would be the things that we would be doing. So the whole idea is we're trying to create value for our prospect early. We're also trying to learn as much as we can to kind of jumpstart and expedite that process. And 3, we're trying to model, and feel like how that collaborative relationship would look. And so at the end of that whiteboard report, assuming that there's, alignment, mutual interest, is when we would ask if they'd be interested in seeing a proposal from us. So all of that is done pre like any real dialogue around like the engagement or anything. They've got an understanding of our model and
Sure.
how it works. But at the end of that whiteboard report, so we've already invested 5 or 6 hours in total into that prospect before we're even asking them if they're interested in the proposal.
Gotcha.
So that says a lot right then and there, and so that's why you have to be really selective. You have to be able to convert that whiteboard at a really high rate. Otherwise, you're going to be doing a lot of free work.
Yeah.
But we've found that we can vet appropriately and then convert at a really high level. And it's just been a really impactful beginning to our relationships, with that level of detail and understanding. And it's pretty amazing. We have people all the time ask us like what stage, like how many conversations until you get there. And they're always surprised when they hear it's just, like one initial conversation. And then we're diving into like, intimate details of their business and kind of the skeletons in the closet. So I'm proud that we're able to get to that as quickly as we do. And I think it has a lot to do with like, doing a good job of building rapport and trust in that initial conversation. But it's been wildly impactful for our work and just allowed us to build really good partnerships from the jump.
I love that model, and I'm always been and continue to be a huge proponent of value first, right? I mean, that speaks to your culture. Everything you've talked about here, Scott, on the podcast interview here has been all about how do I give first? How do I bring value first? And that unsurprisingly is reflected in your sales process. And the 4 things I wrote down about this whiteboarding session, right? I wouldn't think of them as objectives, but maybe that's what they are. But the 4 things that happen within the context of the whiteboarding session, you tell me if I missed something, but I think this is a model that could be adapted by other, in virtually any type of consultant type of relationship. And maybe certain consultants are doing part of this, maybe they're not doing all of it. But the 4 things that came to mind are, number 1, lead with value. How can we answer questions that this company has? How can we bring value? How can we leverage our expertise and even the questions we're asking to help give insight and provide value? So I think that's primary 1, right? The second item is to learn, right? So while the client is learning, you're getting important insight and data that I assume this happens during the whiteboarding session. It may become clear that this organization may not be a fit for you, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's part of the process. Yes.
Yes.
So learning about the organization, are they a fit, that kind of thing. And that's the third thing I separated was, are they a right fit for us to work with? So you're trying to make that determination during the whiteboard. The client or the potential client at that point is probably making the same determination. So in some ways it's a mutual interview, but you get that experience of what it's going to be like to work together, like you said. And then the 4th item, which just relates to everything else, is it is a showcase opportunity. Right? It is an opportunity to establish your authority. And obviously we're here on Consulting with Authority. And I always like to say that authority is when you're able to demonstrate your knowledge and your skill to a prospect or to a client. That's how you establish authority. It's not by someone saying you're an authority or you're a thought leader. It's through the demonstration of your expertise and skill. And so that whiteboarding opportunity, that forum, gives you the ideal place to be able to establish that authority. It's not about showing off for showing off's sake. It's truly about demonstrating to them, yes, we can have an intelligent conversation on this topic. Yes, we probably have some value for you that you should consider moving ahead with. Value, learning, right fit, building authority, any other objectives within that whiteboarding process that are focal points for you or that come out of that process?
I think that's a really nice summary. And there's a few thoughts that accompany that I think drive the point home. One is I was so anxious at first to say, hey, we need 2 hours to do this. And I'm like, we've had one conversation. Is the business owner going to wrangle up their other key stakeholders and take 2 hours with me?
Yeah.
Who am I? All that stuff. And so what we found was those that were unwilling to invest that time, so, hey, can we do 90 minutes? I only have an hour. Immediately, we're starting to fall off our ideal client profile fit.
Gotcha.
So I didn't know it at first, because I was anxious about it myself. But those that were saying, let's do it. I want to talk about my business. I want to get my other key stakeholders in this thing. This is the most important thing we're doing all week. Versus this is another meeting on my calendar today.
Yep.
That was immediate. So there was indication. And so we have come out of those whiteboard sessions and disqualified prospects and provided them alternative options.
Right.
It's not us, but here are some things that might be a better fit for you at the time.
Yep.
So that's one thing for sure. And then the authority piece, our big thing is you have your process, you're the expert, and then you walk them through your process. Mm-hmm. We see and hear all the time our clients say to their prospects, like, hey, what do you think we should do next? Yeah. Hey, when do you want to reconnect? And anytime a meeting is ended with an open loop, the thing is gone. Right. Like the winning percentage is out the window. And so our whole thing is intro to whiteboard, whiteboard to report, report to proposal, proposal to final proposal review, bop, bop, bop.
Yep.
And everything leaves with a date.
Yep.
And so that's the authority. There's no questioning it. It's not salesy.
It's just the process. Yeah.
It's just the process. And we're leading them through this, and they're happy to be, following along. But the whole thing is that we've defined the process. And that's what so many organizations don't have, that leaves them saying, hey, what do you want to do next? And then the whole thing's out the window.
Yep. That's huge. That's huge. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for carving out some time. We're coming up on time. One last question that I always ask, somewhat of a cliche question, but the reason it's a cliche is because it's been around forever. And the reason it's been around forever is because it's a great question. Biggest lesson or lessons learned during your career? Aerotech, Carver, Peterson, pandemic, pull from your source. But what have you perceived as your greatest lessons learned being in the space that you're in, specifically as a consultant and helping clients improve their state?
Yeah. The thing that I've learned more than anything is just staying true to your vision. So I loved my time at Aerotech, but it came to a point where it wasn't serving my vision. Yeah. And my personal life, came where there was an opportunity in my personal life, and I pursued that. And starting this business, part of it was I wanted to be able to coach my kids' teams someday.
Yeah. Well, your experience with your dad, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so there are times when I get really conflicted with that, right? Where it's like, you see other people accomplishing things, or what you really believe in and want and are working toward can get cloudy, and it can impact decisions of so it's being crystal clear on your vision and really why you're doing what you do, and just being true to that, because when that's at the forefront, everything else fits, right? The people that come and want to be a part of your organization align to that. The companies that you partner with align to that. That's the center point of everything. And so there have been times, that I've gotten away from that or tucked that behind. Mm-hmm. And it's when I've been at my worst, so I'm just really proud that, I've been able to pursue this for 6 years and get better every single day, and keep working toward that vision.
That's fantastic. And that's a great note to end our discussion on. Be clear to yourself, know what your vision is, and don't put it on the back burner. Keep it in front of you. Listen, Scott, thank you again for your time. You've been very generous, not only with your time, but with your expertise today and sharing with everybody, your story and how you got to where you are. If someone wants to find out about Carver Peterson, to potentially be a strategic partner, to potentially be a client, or just to connect, what's the best way for them to find you online, locate you, be in connection with you?
Our website is www.carverpeterson.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. My name's Scott Peterson, and my email address is scott@carverpeterson.com. So those are three good ways to connect.
Cool.
But Scott, I really appreciate you having me. You've been a great host, and I look forward to continuing to build our strategic partnership and relationship as well.
100% agree. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the time today.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got a ton of value out of this episode. And before we go, I want to thank the sponsor of our show, Smart Solutions Media. Smart Solutions Media empowers business owners, consultants, and other independent professionals to easily attract better prospects and transform them into long-term clients. If you're a B2B consultant or service professional and would like to start filling your pipeline with better quality prospects, visit us on the web at smartsolutionsmedia.com to learn more about what we can do to help you. Be sure to complete the short 2-minute accelerated growth scorecard you can find on the website, and you'll receive a complimentary strategy session where we'll give you specific insights and recommendations to help you attract high-value clients. Until next time, make sure you are consulting with authority.